The afternoon at Harcourt Manor drifted by with the languor of some ancient hymn. A fine mist clung about the row of beeches before the house, scattering a silver sheen upon the gray stone steps. Evelyn stood by the tall casement, her fingers pressed against the cold pane, following the rivulets that traced downward as though some unseen hand were inscribing invisible lines of letter lines that seemed to draw her life upon a course, not of her own choosing. Upon the dressing table lay a letter, its crimson seal broken, bearing the escutcheon of the Ravenscroft line, a device at once splendid and as perilous as the edge of a blade set to the throat of the Harcourts. "My lady," came the soft murmur of Anne, her devoted maid. "Her ladyship inquires, shall you descend to table this evening?" Evelyn turned. She attempted a smile, yet her lips betrayed her. "Tell my mother I am unwell. I shall remain here." With a faint nod, she dismissed the girl, and the door fell silent. The chamber held its breath. The only sound was the crackle of the fire, its scent of oak mingling with the lavender that hung dried in the corner fragments of a childhood when evenings were serene. Ere debt and ruin surged like a flood to sweep all peace away. She approached the table once more, touching the parchment as though to prove it had not vanished like some ill dream. "Evelyn, beloved child, the matter is settled. Thou shalt become Duchess of Wexford ere this month is spent." Beneath her father's hand sprawled a litany of terms: dowry, debts redeemed, mortgages upon the northern wood, promises of provision for her sisters until their marriages. Dry, merciless words. Yet their conclusion was plain. Evelyn Harcourt was to be bartered for the safety of her house. She had long foreseen it. Harcourt's fields had lain drowned the past season. Half the flock perished of murrain. Her father bent beneath the ledgers, unable to resist the siren call of cards that robbed him till dawn. Often Evelyn yearned to clasp him as she had when a child, when he bound her scraped knee. Yet now she could only stand apart, a frail buttress to a crumbling wall. Adrian Ravenscroft, Duke of Wexford. His name evoked a host of whispers. Widower, master of vast estates rolling into the morning mist. A man whose heart had closed since wife and infant were lost in childbirth. He appeared at no assemblies, danced at no balls, bestowed no smile. To society, he was but a darkened chamber where only the clock ticked punctual, unfeeling, inexorable. Evelyn pictured him, a man of 40 years, formidable, exiled from warmth. What part was she to play in his existence, save a signature upon parchment, a vessel to bear an heir? A knock again. Anne's voice. "Mr. Alden, the steward, craves a word. He says is about the northern wood and my lord's command." Evelyn drew the ribbon of her sleeve into order and opened the door. The corridor lay hushed, her steps muffled upon the worn carpet. At the stairs' foot awaited Alden, stooped, yet steady. Eyes keen still. "My lady," he bowed. "To creditors are to examine the pledged estate next week. My lord bids you rest assured. Should the nuptials be arranged swiftly, they would see the fetter clasped fast." Evelyn answered with a wan curve of the lips. "Yes, I comprehend." She paused. "And my mother. The lady is anxious, yet she trusts to your strength." His gaze lingered upon her gown neatly mended, where only a household eye might discern. "All within these walls place their hope in you." Evelyn inclined her head, thanked him, and withdrew. Alone once more, she sat by the hearth, her hands clenched white. It was not the ring nor the ceremony that she feared, but the unspoken sentences beyond the contract, the long nights beside a stranger, the merciless scrutiny of society, the childbed where death himself might linger smiling. Her own mother had lost infants thus. Warned to desist, she yet endured, whispering of duty. Evelyn remembered that gazing abyss without bottom. Upon the mantel lay her little cedar box, keeper of relics from gentler years. She opened it, a faded ribbon, a card from her first ball, and the last letter of Sir Thomas Redwick. Evelyn, forgive me. My family demands a fortune secure. Thou art tender, wise, but had been the blade. There she had buried her first love and her faith in romance. Since then, she had learnt to smile just enough, speak with measure, and veil her soul beneath the silk of decorum. A thunderclap rolled afar. Evelyn closed the box as though sealing a grave. She was no longer the dreaming maiden. If life demanded a bargain, she would pay it with upright carriage and clear gaze, rescuing her sisters, securing her mother's peace from the wrap of creditors. She might not choose the road, but she might yet choose how to tread it. The mirror reflected a young woman whose composure seemed almost unfamiliar. "Evelyn Harcourt," she whispered, "thou shalt become Duchess of Wexford." Not with trembling heart, but with steadfast will. Her eyes fell again upon her father's letter, its hand unsteady with drink, yet striving for tenderness. "Forgive thy father. He believes thou art strong." A warmth stirred in her chest. Some errors of age could never be undone, yet might be borne by the child's grown wise. She drew the inkwell close, lifted her quill. The scratch of pen upon paper was the sound of covenant. To his Grace, the Duke of Wexford, Adrian Ravenscroft. I, Evelyn Harcourt, by arrangement of my family and by my own resolve, consent to this union. I trust in mutual respect and in compassion, though we begin as strangers. I shall fulfill my duty with honor. She laid down her quill, studying the firm lines. Compassion. The word glowed faintly, no blind passion, but human kindness, a flame to warm a cold house. "Anne," she called softly. The maid entered. "Bear this letter to Mr. Alden, that he may send it at dawn." Anne received it with trembling hands. "Yes, my lady." She faltered, then dared. "Are you afraid?" Evelyn met her loyal gaze. Beneath her calm skin, fear coursed like an underground river. "Aye," she murmured. "Yet still I shall go on." Anne bowed, eyes glistening, and withdrew. Evelyn returned to the window. The rain had ceased. The sky was streaked with pale light. Beyond the northern wood lay the lands of Wexford, where Adrian Ravenscroft ruled like stone. She pressed her palm to the pane. Perhaps that place would soon be called home. Perhaps there she would learn to walk beside a man unknown, and yet preserve some part of herself. The clock told 6, each stroke deliberate. Evelyn added logs to the fire. Flames leaped, casting light upon the gown in its muslin sheath, the ivory garment. Her mother and sisters had stitched by candle 2 nights through. She sat close, warming her hands. From somewhere below came the hesitant notes of her youngest sister at the pianoforte, stumbling, then finding the waltz again. For the first time that day, Evelyn smiled. Not every dance began in perfect step. Marriage, perchance, was alike, a falter. Then the attempt to move together. Night descended upon Harcourt Manor, cloaking it in solemn hush. Before lighting her bedside candle, Evelyn opened the casement a little. Cool air swept in, bearing the resinous scent of the northern pines. She whispered, whether to father, to mother, or to fate itself, she knew not, "I am ready." Far away, where sky and earth blurred in mist, perhaps a man too was gazing into the dark, counting the solemn ticks of his clock, unknowing that the letter she had penned would bend both their lives toward one another. Within the vast chamber of Ravenscroft Hall, the firelight cast long, restless shadows upon walls hung with the portraits of ancient forebears. Before the likeness of his departed wife, Lady Margaret, stood Adrian Ravenscroft, Duke of Wexford. Her painted countenance, immortalized at 25, glowed with fair hair rendered strand by strand, and eyes of gentle radiance that seemed still to gaze upon the living world. Adrian raised a glass of brandy. The spirit burned his throat, yet left his heart colder than the draught that crept in through the casement. I had never thought to wed again," he murmured, his voice vanishing into the heavy silence. Yet duty yields no pardon. The memory of that fatal night, when both Margaret and their infant son were lost to the travail of childbirth, remained carved upon his soul. The physician's despairing cry, the sobs of maidservants, and the dreadful stillness of a chamber drenched in the scent of laudanum and death. For 5 long years he had barred his heart, living solitary as stone. Yet whenever his eyes fell upon his cousin, Percivella sunk deeper in gaming and drink. Adrian perceived the peril. Should he die without lawful heir, the name of Ravenscroft, with its centuries of estate and honor, must pass into reckless hands. The thought was intolerable. Thus, when his solicitor spoke of Miss Evelyn Harcourt tongue, of unsullied lineage, and herself pressed by circumstance into desiring such a union, Adrian inclined to the match. Upon parchment she was flawless, yet within he wrestled still. Might she prove no more than any other lady, seeking in him a talisman to ward her family's ruin? Near at hand stood Grayson, his steward of many years, as faithful as his own shadow. "You are not content with the marriage, my lord?" the steward asked in low, grave tones. "Not discontent," Adrian replied, setting down the glass. "Rather uncertain. Once before I entered matrimony with trust and lost all. This time I would know the woman ere I bind my fate to hers. And how shall you contrive it, my lord?" Adrian turned the heavy signet of his house between his fingers, eyes resolute. "I shall go to Harcourt Manor not as duke, but as servant. Only thus, unseen, may I discern the true nature of Evelyn Harcourt." Grayson started. "You would disguise yourself? Indeed. Procure for me a false station. A newly hired footman sent from the city. The Harcourts, beset by debt, cannot refuse the aid. But should your secret be uncovered," Adrian cut him short, "better her wrath for deception than blindness leading me into a union I cannot endure. A single week in service will reveal more than 100 evenings of candlelight and polished courtesies." Grayson was silent long, remembering the desolation that had followed Margaret's death. He understood well that Adrian's caution sprang not only from duty to his name, but from a wounded heart that dared not shatter once more. "At your command, my lord," he said at last, with a grave bow. "From henceforth you shall be Edward Hale, temporary footman." Adrian permitted himself the ghost of a smile. "Edward Hale," he echoed, tasting the foreignness of the name. 3 days thereafter, a modest carriage halted at the gates of Harcourt Manor. From it descended a man in coarse brown coat, bearing but a small wooden trunk. His face was stern, yet devoid of noble bearing, his eyes lowered with suitable humility. He presented to Mr. Alden, Harcourt steward, a letter of introduction from a London agency. "We are in want of hands for the Duke of Wexford's impending visit," Alden declared, eyes raking him from head to heel. "You may begin at once." "Yes, sir, Adrian, now Edward," Hale answered with quiet deference, led down to the servants' quarters. He beheld the narrow bed, the hard pallet, the cracked basin of water. How far removed it was from the velvet cushions of his ducal chamber. Seating himself, his back sore from bearing his trunk, he allowed a wry laugh. "So it begins," he whispered. On his first day he was set to carry coal to the drawing-room and to lay the dining table. Sweat dampened his shirt. Soot blackened his hands. Yet he uttered no complaint, for he sought truth. And truth was not to be glimpsed from lofty halls, but from the humblest station, and at last the moment came. As he bore a tray along the great passage, the door of the drawing-room opened. From its threshold emerged a slender figure, Evelyn Harcourt. She wore a gown of pale blue, modestly cut, her brown hair gathered neatly. Her step was graceful, yet her countenance bore the trace of sorrow. Her gaze swept past Edward Hale, without pause. Yet in that fleeting instant, when their eyes brushed. Adrian felt as though he had glimpsed a fragile gleam within the darkness, a soul unfit for the fetters awaiting her. He inclined his head as any menial would, striving to cloak himself in anonymity. But within, a heart thought long extinguished trembled once again. The first day of servitude crept by with weary slowness. Adrian, bearing now the borrowed name of Edward, halberd to master the art of carrying a tray without spilling, of bowing without betraying the innate command that was graven into his very frame. He who had once been obeyed by hundreds must now stand silent for hours, hands clasped behind him, as though he were no one at all. The following morning, fate itself contrived his meeting with her, not through painted likeness, nor whispered rumor, but face to living face. Ascending the stair with a burden of linen, he beheld Evelyn Harcourt descending the great staircase. She wore a gown of palest blue, her brown hair pinned in a neat coil. Her step was graceful, yet her countenance bore the shade of sorrow. In that instant, Adrian forgot the part he played. He looked up, and his gaze met hers. Those eyes, gray and clear, were not the eyes of some haughty heiress, but the eyes of one who had tasted loss. She passed him with but the faintest inclination of her head, the courteous acknowledgment of a mistress to a new servant. Yet the moment lingered within him, as though some tiny fissure had opened in the wall of ice about his heart. In the days that followed, he observed her silently. Each morning she withdrew to the library, where oft she sat before a blank page, the pen unmoving in her hand. At times she took her place at the pianoforte, her fingers coaxing strains of music that were tender, mournful, touched with an ache unspeakable. In such hours she seemed transformed, not the reluctant bride awaiting her fate, but a soul yearning to be unbound. He heard, too, the whispers of the household. One maid sighed, "Our mistress is pitiable. She does not desire this marriage." Another replied, "Who would? To wed a widowed duke, twice her age. They call him the Stone of Wexford." Adrian allowed himself a bitter smile. Aye, he had permitted the world to think him nothing more than stone. His chance came when Evelyn received her dearest friend, Lady Helena Ashford. Adrian was tasked with serving tea upon the terrace. He contrived to let the milk jug slip, spilling a few drops upon the cloth, and offered humble apology. Evelyn frowned, yet her eyes lingered upon him with a keenness that unsettled his disguise. Helena chattered brightly. "Evelyn, tell me, is the Duke of Wexford truly so dreadful as the stories say?" Evelyn sighed, spooning sugar into her cup. "I cannot say. I have never met him. Yet they tell me he is cold, a widower, and seeks only a womb to bear his heir. I expect nothing beyond the barest civility." Adrian, standing behind them, heard every syllable. Her words struck his heart. She thought of marriage to him as naught but a stark transaction. Helena protested, "But love may come after." Evelyn laughed brightly, but without warmth. "Love. Do not be foolish, Helena. I have learnt that lesson. A gentleman once swore himself to me and abandoned me for a dowry. Since then, I know love does not dwell in marriages of our station, only contracts." Adrian bent his head, his hands tightening upon the tray. He had hoped she might be different, yet she echoed his own bitter creed. The irony stung that he, who had scorned affection, now longed for more than mere bargain. That night, within the narrow chamber of his disguise, Adrian sat by candlelight and opened a small leather book. For the first time in years, he wrote lines meant for no eyes but his own. "She trusts not in love. Yet I have seen within her eyes pain, longing, and a soul not wholly extinguished. I came hither to test her, but perchance it is I who am being tried." And at the page's end he sat down. "On the morrow I shall contrive to speak with her, not as a duke, but as a man. I must know whether her heart still holds room for truth." Evening descended upon Harcourt Manor, and the long corridors glowed with the violet-tinged amber of the setting sun. In a modest chamber set aside for reading, Evelyn sat alone by the window, an oft-handled novel lying open upon her lap. A wandering draught stirred through the casement, loosening stray tendrils from her carefully pinned hair. She smoothed them back with absent fingers, yet her eyes scarcely rested upon the page. Her thoughts were far away, tangled in memories and forebodings. The door creaked softly. The new servant, Edward Hale, entered, bearing a vase of fresh flowers and a folded cloth. Evelyn glanced at him, ready to utter the customary courtesy. But his gaze was unlike that of the other domestic, steady, searching, as though he were reading the unspoken questions of her soul. "Place it there." "Near the fire," she directed, coolly. "Yes, my lady," Edward answered, setting down the white chrysanthemums. He was preparing to withdraw when her voice detained him, careless in tone, yet edged with some hidden intent. "Do you read books?" He paused, startled. Never had any mistress of a house inquired so of a servant. Turning, he saw her still bent over the volume, as though the words had slipped out unmeant. "I do, my lady. Mostly histories and a little philosophy." Her gray eyes lifted, touched with curiosity. "Strange. I had thought a servant a little time more leisure for such pursuits." Edward smiled faintly, with a bitterness barely veiled. "Opportunity is rare, it is true. But when a man has lost much, reading is the one refuge by which the mind is kept from decay." His words struck her, and behind her carefully measured reserve, Evelyn discerned the outline of a wound deeper than appearances betrayed. This footman was not obsequious, nor timid, nor coarse. Something tempered in sorrow lived within his gaze. She closed her book, resting her chin lightly upon her hand, and surprised herself by asking, "Have you lost something, then?" Edward's eyes lingered on the fire, long, uncertain. For a moment he forgot his disguise. "My wife," he said at length, voice rough with memory. "And a child unborn." Evelyn's breath caught. It was no artifice. His tone was the sound of a wound still bleeding. She laid down the book and clasped her hands. "I grieve for you," she whispered. "Such a loss must never be soothed." He inclined his head, the corner of his mouth lifting without mirth. "It does not vanish, my lady. It only alters its shape, becomes a part of one's own flesh. Some days I feel it walking beside me like a phantom." Her silence was heavy. She thought of her mother, compelled to endure grief upon grief in the name of duty, bearing child after child, though warned against it. She thought of herself, soon to be consort to a stranger duke, expected to bring forth heirs for a lineage not her own. A shudder coursed through her frame. I am afraid the confession slipped forth unguarded, and she faltered. "Afraid of what, my lady?" His voice was grave, yet gentle. She shook her head, lips pressed tight. But at last, drawn by an invisible thread, she murmured, "Afraid I shall become but a living husk, fulfilling duty with no life left in me." My mother was so. In her eyes I saw an emptiness no one could fill. The fire crackled. The silence pressed close. Edward did not answer at once. He stepped toward the shelves and drew forth a slim volume of verse. "Perhaps," he said softly, "men and women endure by clinging to words such as these." He held the book to her. "Wordsworth. He wrote of nature, but he wrote also of the wounds of the heart." Their hands brushed as she received it. A current seemed to leap between them. She looked up, startled, into eyes that were warm, fathomless, and strangely unsuited to a servant's station. "You are unlike others." "Edward," she whispered, striving to mask her disquiet. "Not at all as I imagined." He bowed his head. "Each of us carries a story untold." "My lady?" She said no more, but her gaze lingered, bright with a curiosity she had granted to no man before. That night, returned to his narrow chamber, Adrian sat by a flickering candle, opening the very Wordsworth he had placed in her hands. The page glowed pale in the dim light, and for the first time in many years he read not for distraction, but for remembrance of Evelyn Harcourt's sorrowful gray eyes. I came hither to test her, he thought, yet it is I who am put to the trial. The day of the wedding dawned swifter than Evelyn had believed. Over Wexford village the heavens lay pale, tier upon tier of white cloud, as though even the sky stood hushed before a rite bereft of joy. In the ancient square, the little church lifted its steeple. The iron bell tolled its deep, solemn summons. Within, the oaken pews were thronged. Nobles of the county whispered among themselves, some casting glances toward the bride mingled with pity and curiosity. Evelyn advanced down the crimson carpet, her gown of ivory stitched by the hands of her mother and sisters, trembling with each step. She carried herself erect, her face like stone carved to resemble serenity. Yet beneath her silk gloves, her hands quivered faintly. At the altar, Adrian Ravenscroft awaited, austere in black raiment, faultlessly cut. His shoulders squared, his expression mastered. Beside him, the priest opened the book of rites, intoning with grave cadence. Adrian's gaze followed Evelyn as she approached, but she looked straight ahead, as though he were but a statue. When the question was put, Adrian Ravenscroft, "Wilt thou take this woman?" he answered without hesitation. "I will." The firmness of his tone startled even those accustomed to his severity. Then came Evelyn's turn. Her throat tightened. She remembered his confession in the library, remembered the anguish and the fire in his eyes. Some hidden corner of her soul longed to cry no, but then she beheld her mother in the pew, anxious gaze uplifted, and her two little sisters clasping each other's hands. The weight of it all bore down upon her. "I will," she said at last, her voice crisp. Cold, the church fell still. Then the bells pealed triumphant, proclaiming them man and wife. Yet there were no smiles, no radiant glances, only two figures, like twin pillars of stone, bound together by duty's chain. By eventide, the carriages drew before Ravenscroft Hall, its domes and vast windows blazing with sunset. Evelyn alighted, stiff-necked beneath the scrutiny of assembled servants welcoming their new duchess. To her, the castle was no home but a fortress, alien and forbidding. Adrian walked beside her, imposing and silent. In the drawing-room, he placed in her hands a small casket of blue silk. Within lay a key of silver, gleaming. "This is the key to my private study," he said, voice low and hoarse. "From henceforth no door shall be closed against you." The metal lay cool upon her palm. She understood the gesture, an offering of trust, a vow of no more secrecy. Yet her heart shuddered fast, refused to yield. "Thank you, Your Grace," she replied. Eyes distant, Adrian closed his own, swallowing disappointment. He had longed for her to speak his name, to let but a spark of warmth enter her gaze. Instead, he met the same wall of ice. That night, in the chamber prepared for them, Evelyn sat by the window, gazing upon the garden drowned in moonlight. The silver key glimmered upon the table. Beyond the wind sighed through ancient trees, chanting its mournful hymn. Adrian entered, setting aside his coat. He beheld her slender back, solitary against the glass, and his heart contracted. He longed to speak words to break the silence, yet his tongue faltered. At last he uttered only, "Evelyn, I know I have wronged you, but I swear this marriage shall not be mere bargain. If it take a lifetime, I will prove it otherwise." She did not turn. Her reply was quiet, unyielding. "You need not. We both know why I am here. Duty, nothing more." The space between them yawned wide, a gulf dividing shore from shore. Adrian sank upon a chair apart, his head bowed, hands clasped. Thus began their union, two hearts dwelling far distant, though the world now named them one. Dawn poured its pale gold across the windows of Harcourt Manor, each pane returning the light like a dulled mirror. Evelyn stood before her wardrobe, her hands clasping the ivory gown her mother had chosen for the day's solemn encounter with the Duke of Wexford. Her breast felt weighted with stone, yet her face retained its practiced calm. The night before her father had spoken, on the morrow, "The Duke shall arrive." There was no longer retreat. Meanwhile, in the servants' wing, Adrian, still clothed in the guise of Edward Hale, sat at a scarred wooden desk. He penned 2 letters. One to Grayson, instructing that his ceremonial attire and carriage be dispatched at once. The other to Evelyn. Every word was carved with painful care, each stroke of the quill piercing his conscience. "My Lady Evelyn, there is a truth I must confess. I beg you to grant me audience in the library at first light. Permit me but a single chance to explain." His heart thundered. The torment of these days had reached its crisis. He could not continue to lurk behind a false name, nor allow her to enter matrimony with a phantom of his own contrivance. When Evelyn entered the library, the windows were still misted with dawn. Light had not yet conquered the somber oak and ancient bindings. To her surprise, Edward was waiting without tray, without flowers only, eyes heavy with sorrow fixed upon her. "Edward, why hast thou summoned me?" she asked, her hand resting upon the back of a chair for steadiness. He advanced a step, and in that motion his bearing altered. Slowly he drew from his pocket a massive ring, engraved with intricate arms, and slid it upon his finger. In the morning glow the gold blazed. Bearing the seal of Ravenscroft, his voice rang, no longer deferential, but with the authority of his station. "I am not Edward Hale. I am Adrian Ravenscroft, Duke of Wexford." The chamber froze. Evelyn's eyes widened. Her lips trembled ere she expelled a sharp breath. "You deceived me." "I did not come to mock thee," Adrian implored. "I came that I might know thee not by hearsay, nor by the hollow mask of noble society." She laughed bitterly, the sound breaking in her throat. "And so thou didst disguise thyself, dwelling among my servants, overhearing my private speech, even coaxing me to bear my deepest fears." "I erred," he confessed, gaze unwavering. "Yet all I told thee of Margaret, of my loss, was true." Evelyn recoiled, her back striking the shelves. The world spun about her. In her mind echoed the voice of Sir Thomas Redwick, who once cast her aside with the plea, "I act but for my future." And now the Duke, the man destined to be her husband, confessed likewise to using her trust for his own ends. "You are no better than he," she cried, her voice breaking. "You made me a plaything of your suspicion." Adrian stepped forward, hand outstretched as if to stay her bitterness. "Evelyn, hear me. I came because I desired not a lifeless union. I would know who you are, that if we stand together at the altar, might hope for more than a contract." Her eyes brimmed with unshed tears. "And you think, once betrayed, I could ever trust a single word of yours?" Silence descended, heavy as iron. Beyond the walls, a morning bird sang light and uncertain. A cruel contrast to the tumult within. At last Evelyn straightened, her voice steeled. "We shall marry still. My family requires your safeguard, and you, your Duchess, to bear an heir. But remember, whatever hope there might have been, you have shattered. This marriage shall be but a bargain, nothing more." Each syllable cut him to the quick. Adrian stood motionless, his hand falling, breath hollow. He longed to protest, to plead that something genuine had kindled between them. Yet the barricade of grief in her gaze forbade all speech. She turned and departed, her gown sweeping like a cold wind across the chamber. When the door closed, Adrian remained solitary amidst the dim gold of the rising sun. For the first time in many years, the Duke of Ravenscroft felt himself weak. "I have wrought a new wound," he thought, "but I shall heal it even if it cost me a lifetime." Morning lay fair upon Ravenscroft Hall, serene as a painted scene. In the southern garden the roses opened to the dew, their crimson hearts unveiled amidst the mist. Evelyn sat in the breakfast room, her hands occupied with arranging the invitations to a welcoming faitan office her late mother-in-law had once overseen, now fallen upon her shoulders. She worked with outward composure, yet inwardly her spirit trembled with hidden tides. Opposite her sat Adrian, his gaze bent upon the rustling pages of the Times. The hush between them was broken only by the turning of leaves. Neither spoke of the wedding night passed in silence, each apart, strangers beneath a single roof. A knock came sharply. The steward entered. "Sir Thomas Redwick, my lord." At the name Evelyn started, color rising to her face, her heart stumbling in its beat. Adrian lowered the paper, his keen eyes swiftly observing the change in his wife's countenance. Sir Thomas entered, still bearing the polish of former days, though his smile was edged with weariness. "Lady Evelyn," he murmured, bowing low, his voice as smooth as ever. "I know I am undeserving, yet I beg leave to see you." Evelyn's fingers clenched the table's edge. Memory surged his letter of renunciation, the cold glance with which he had chosen another heiress over her. And now he stood within her husband's house. "You have no cause to be here," she said, her tone firm. But Thomas pressed on, casting a glance at Adrian before bowing lower still. "I know my fault. My wife is dead, my fortune gone. Evelyn, his voice faltered. "I have never ceased to remember you." Adrian rose, tall and commanding, the room contracting beneath his presence. "Sir Redwick," he said, with icy authority, "this is the house of the Duke of Wexford. I will not suffer you to insult my Duchess with such pitiful pleas. Depart, ere I summon men to cast you out." Thomas paled, yet contrived a thin smile. "The world is smaller than you think, my lord. We shall meet again." With that he withdrew, leaving behind the bitter trace of tobacco smoke. It seemed the matter closed, yet the shadow lengthened. A few days later, at the first grand assembly, Evelyn attended as Duchess of Wexford. Another spectre appeared, Lord Percival Ravenscroft, Adrian's dissolute cousin, beneath chandeliers ablaze with light. Percival drank and jested loudly, his words dripping with insolence. Evelyn caught fragments, a mere façade, married only to redeem her ruined family. A circle of ladies turned, their fans concealing laughter. Heat burned Evelyn's cheeks, but she kept her back straight. She was accustomed to whispers. Yet now the slander struck heavier, for it touched not only herself, but the honor of Ravenscroft. Across the hall, Adrian, standing in stern dignity, saw her face, and in that instant comprehended all. Striding forward, his voice rang clear. "Permit me to present my wife Evelyn, Duchess of Wexford. No soul in this hall holds right to question her place." The words fell like a blade severing the murmur. The company stirred uneasily. None dared reply. Percival's smile curled, but in his eyes glimmered a spark of malice. Later, Kay's home, Evelyn sat silent, her hands tight upon her gown. Then Adrian spoke quietly. "I will not allow any man to tarnish your name. Be it Percival or another, I shall stand between." She turned towards him. For the first time she beheld not the cold Duke, but a man resolved to shield another with his very honor. Her heart trembled softly, secretly, though she veiled it in measured tones. "Thank you, my lord. Yet this will not end so simply." Adrian inclined his head, lips pressed firm. He knew well, their marriage was no longer only a trial of hearts, but a battlefield of power and repute. And from that moment he had chosen his side to stand with her, whatever the cost. Autumn winds wandered through the ancient corridors of Ravenscroft Hall, bearing the scent of withered maple leaves and of rumors that would not die. Evelyn sat before her dressing table, her hair loose upon her shoulders, though her hands scarcely moved upon the comb. Percival's cruel words still echoed. She is but a façade. Each whisper felt a needle striking her pride. The door opened quietly. Adrian entered, carrying a small wooden casket. He set it upon the table, yet spoke not at first, only looked upon her long and intently. "What would you have of me, my lord?" Evelyn asked, her tone measured, though her eyes betrayed caution. Adrian drew breath. "I would have you know I defended you not before society out of mere duty. I did so because I believe you worthy. Percival spreads his falsehoods, yet I shall unmask him." Evelyn lifted her gaze, a faint, bitter smile upon her lips. "Words are poor armor, as you well know. Men such as Percival forge their chains of forged proofs." Adrian opened the box, drawing forth sealed papers from the bank. "Here are copies of his debts. He has borrowed wildly, mortgaged even his mother's estate. Were I to reveal these, his honor would dissolve to dust." Evelyn's eyes lingered upon the damning figures. A strange tide rose within her, half relief, half wonder. This man, who had once deceived her in a servant's guise, now placed in her hands the weapon to ruin his own kin, trusting her wholly. "You mean to wield them?" she asked softly. "No," Adrian answered firmly. "I shall keep them only as restraint. But I would have you know you are not alone. This time, you and I stand upon the same ground." Something stirred within her heart, a sudden ray through the darkness. She turned away, lest he see her eyes glisten. No one has ever spoken so to me." Days later, Percival struck again, spreading poison through London. Evelyn, he claimed, had been abandoned by Sir Thomas Redwick and now married merely to preserve her name. Invitations dwindled from her hand. Ladies turned their shoulders when she entered. That afternoon, Evelyn stood in the library when Adrian burst in, fire in his eyes. He flung a printed sheet upon the desk. "Percival released, this he writes, you were cast off by Redwick, and that you wed me only to clutch at rank." Evelyn trembled, her hands curling tight. "It is true, he forsook me. But to wield that shame as a weapon," her voice broke. Adrian seized her shoulders. "Hear me, Evelyn. I shall not let his words stand as the only truth remembered. Tomorrow I shall host a gathering at Ravenscroft Hall. Before all, I will proclaim you, my Duchess, the sole lady of my house." Her eyes widened. "You would confront your own blood. You know the censure you will draw." "Let them censure me," Adrian declared, his voice like steel. "But none shall slander you." In that moment, Evelyn perceived him anew, the cold duke she had feared, but a man resolved to shield her against the world. The frost upon her heart cracked a little wider. The morrow's feast shone with 1,000 candles, the orchestra swelling in stately measure. Guests whispered, awaiting the duke's words. Percival lingered in the shadows, a cruel smile playing. Adrian led Evelyn to the center. Lifting his glass, his voice rang across the hall. "Mark me well. This is Evelyn Harcourt, now Duchess of Wexford. She is not merely my chosen consort. She is the one I honor and trust above all. Any who insult her insult the very name Ravenscroft." The murmur ceased. All eyes turned upon Evelyn. She stood tall, her cheeks flushed, her eyes bright with a newborn pride. For the first time, she felt no longer solitary. Percival's hand crushed his goblet, his face dark, but he dared not speak. None in the hall would echo his malice. Evelyn turned slightly to Adrian, her voice scarcely more than breath. "Thank you." He met her gaze, lips shaping words only she could hear. "From henceforth, we are together." And in that instant, beneath the splendor of candlelight, the two were no longer strangers bound by law. They were allies shoulder to shoulder, facing the shadows that loomed beyond. The skies above Wexford lay heavy with cloud. the wind rolling as herald of tempest. Evelyn stood upon the highest balcony of Ravenscroft Hall, watching the trees writhe below. Within her breast raged a storm of its own. For word had swept through London, Percival Ravenscroft had loosed a letter. The letter bore Adrian's signature, forged to perfection, pledging to redeem the Harcourt debts should Evelyn consent to wed. The counterfeit seal was near flawless. Rumor flew swift. The Duchess had been bought as chattel. The Duke, a fool who spent his fortune for a burdened bride. In the great hall, Adrian flung the paper upon the table, his eyes flashing wrath. Percival has gone too far. He has not only sullied your name, Evelyn, he has struck at the honor of Ravenscroft itself. What will you do? Evelyn asked, her voice trembling. I shall meet him tonight at the Gentlemen's Club. He believes to press me into ruin. But I will show him Ravenscroft does not yield. Evelyn stepped forward, seizing his hand for the first time without hesitation. No. What if it be a snare? He could harm you. Adrian's grip softened, his gaze gentling for a moment. Fear not. I have weathered storms far greater. But this time I fight not for myself alone. I fight for us. That night the heavens opened, rain pouring as though the sky itself were broken. By the wavering light of oil lamps, Adrian strode into the chamber of the club, where Percival and his accomplices lay in wait. Evelyn, defying his command, had followed from afar, her heart pounding as she crouched behind the paneled wall. You are a deceiver, Percival sneered, brandishing the forged letter. Society believes you purchased your bride with coin. You are unworthy of Ravenscroft. Adrian stood tall, his voice like thunder. What do you seek? I seek your retreat. Yield title and estate to me, or I shall let all England see this marriage for the farce it is. Evelyn's palms were slick, her gown clinging with sweat. If Adrian yielded, his name would be in ruins. If he resisted, Percival's rogues might turn to violence. Suddenly, one lunged from behind, weapon raised. Evelyn could not contain her cry. Adrian, behind you. He wheeled in time, parrying the blow. The chamber erupted in chaos, chairs splintered, glasses shattered, men grappling in the storm of fists. Adrian fought, but numbers pressed hard. Without thought, Evelyn burst forth, seizing a heavy staff from the floor, striking down the ruffian who threatened her husband. Her eyes blazed. No longer a fragile heiress, but a warrior's ally. You are not alone, Adrian, she cried. For a heartbeat he stilled, astonished. Amidst rain and tumult, he beheld his wife beside him, fearless, steadfast. With renewed strength, he felled the last of their foes, then caught her hand in his. His breath came ragged, blood staining his brow, yet his eyes shone fierce. Evelyn, I swear, never again shall you bear humiliation. By all that I am, I will protect you. Her heart leaped into flame. She no longer beheld the cold Duke, nor the false Edward. Before her stood only a man strong, true, and willing to stake his life upon her honor. Tears mingled with the rain as she gasped. Adrian, I tried to hate you, yet my heart defies me. I love you. He drew her into his arms amidst the wreckage, and nothing remained but the two of them. Then let me prove that love worthy, Evelyn. All my days, the storm still roared without, but within her soul a new song rose. Percival's shadow had not vanished, yet she knew she was no longer alone. Love long thought dead had returned to life in the very heart of peril. Winter came to Ravenscroft Hall, cloaking the hills in veils of pale mist. The storm of rumors and intrigues had passed, leaving its scars yet opening a new road. Percival, his debts laid bare, slunk from London in silence, his name whispered with scorn. Sir Thomas Redwick, too, vanished from society. Carrying away the shame he had sown within the great house, the air began to change. The servants whispered that the Duke and his new Duchess no longer moved as statues of ice. They were seen walking together in the gardens, lingering in conversation within the library, and on rarest occasions the hint of a smile touched Evelyn's lips when the Duke spoke. One afternoon, Evelyn stood before the great oak door of Adrian's study. In her hand lay the silver key bestowed upon her on their wedding day. For weeks she had never used it. It was not merely a key to a room, but an invitation into his hidden world. Now her heart was ready. She turned it in the lock. The door yielded. The scent of old wood and leather drifted forth. Adrian looked up from his desk, momentarily struck still. When he saw the key gleaming in her hand, his eyes darkened, then shone. "Evelyn," his voice roughened. "You have chosen to enter." She nodded, approaching. "I have thought much. Of the deception at the first, of the slanders, of Percival's storm. Yet when you stood by me, despite every whisper, I knew I no longer wished to wear the armor of coldness." Adrian rose, closing the distance until only a breath divided them. "I vowed to win back your trust. But I know trust cannot be begged, must be given." Her gray eyes glimmered in the waning light. "Then let me give it." From this day she lifted her face and pressed a timid yet earnest kiss to his lips. Adrian trembled, as though touched by miracle. He gathered her close, answering with all the tenderness and long-stifled yearning within him. In the days that followed, Ravenscroft Hall grew transformed. Evelyn rearranged the library, filling it with volumes dear to her. Adrian welcomed her counsel in matters of estate, concealing nothing of his accounts. They rode together across the fields, spoke of verse, and sometimes shared the hush of sunset silence no longer heavy. But warm society called them the curious pair, a duke and duchess bound by rare closeness. They did not care. They knew what had begun as a cold bargain had ripened into a chosen bond. One evening, as firelight flickered, Evelyn nestled beside Adrian and whispered, "Do you know, sometimes I still think of the name Edward Hale?" Adrian laughed softly, drawing her nearer. "Then call me so when we are alone. For Edward was the first self I laid bare to you." She smiled, resting her head upon his shoulder. "Then, Edward, promise me this, that we shall build our life not upon rumor or duty, but upon truth and trust." Adrian kissed her brow, murmuring, "I promise, and I shall keep it all my days." Beyond, the winter winds moaned through the trees. But within, they had found their own flame. Not a tale of perfection, but of two souls once broken, now piecing themselves together, fashioning a true beginning. We've just finished the story of Evelyn and Adrian, a marriage that began as a transaction but slowly blossomed into true love. How did their journey make you feel? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Snail's Story so you won't miss the next heartfelt tale.